What are obstacles in our labor markets that actually prevent the market right now from clearing? What do you think? Today we have high level of unemployment in a couple of OECD economies. The markets are not clearing, and why is that? What are the obstacles that we would have to remove for the markets to actually work? Okay, there may be obstacles with regard to regulation. Regulation of what? Of what? Of wages. Okay, I come to that. What else?
Information asymmetry.
Information asymmetry. Meaning what? The labor market is not transparent. So we'd have to address this. What else? Jack.
So oligopolies? Monopolies or oligopolies?
What are the monopolies in the labor market?
Some kind of cooperatives or...
All the factor markets in our world are normally subject to antitrust regulation except of the labor market. The labor market is allowed to be cartelized, but the cartels are being run by two groups normally. And that are industry association and labor unions. So to some extent, we have a regulatory impact, not with regard to setting a minimum wage, but with regard to the process of setting the wage. I come to that. Any other reason why the market may not be clearing? David?
Immobility of the labor.
Immobility of the labor. Coming back to our German-US example. The typical American college graduate, Kurt, gets educated in Illinois Polytechnic in chemical engineering. And after having changed his job 5 times, by the time he's 30, he's an investment banker in London. Isn't that true, Kurt?
Almost my path.
Yes, nearly your path, okay. The typical German gets educated at the University of Münster in mathematics, has graduated about 5 years ago, and still sits outside the door of that university hoping that someone sets up a software industry next door. He cannot do anything else but math, and he will not move geographically. So immobility in terms of geography and skills. Okay? Now quickly, let's comment on the process of wage negotiations. If it's in fact so, and of course we see different patterns and different tendencies, but if in fact the wages are being set by industry associations and labor union, then it's of course important to figure out whose interests are being represented in that wage bargaining process. Whose interests are being represented if we have the unions? The union members? Whose interest is being represented? Labor? Which labor? What do you mean current workers? Who are currently employed. Okay. Remember in micro we talked about the steel industry. And cartelizing industries with high operating leverage, there was one fundamental problem in sustaining that cartel. Not only because it's illegal, but you have to keep external guys out of the market. By the time you've elevated the price, you create a market opportunity for someone else to come in. So if the wages are being artificially elevated, it must be the responsibility of the labor union to keep other people outside the market. That otherwise would make the wage collapse again. So the labor unions are representing the interest of the working workers, the employed workers, at the economic disinterest of the unemployed. Okay? Now, who is being represented normally by industry associations? What type of companies at the industry level will have the strongest say in fixing wages within an industry association? Within an industry association, within an industry, so if the technology is the same, it's the same, no? What type of companies? The big ones that have a larger share in the labor pool. So an interesting thing happens is that there are some labor market economists at Stanford, for example, that every now and then come over to Europe because they, in the US labor market, which is so efficient, there's nothing to really study. So every now and then they take a backpack and they come over to Europe for a wildlife safari to look at European labor markets. And they study, for example, the German glass industry. And they're looking at the German glass industry, and they find out that you have two types of companies there. You have small and medium-sized players, mostly family-owned, and you have big glass producers. And the small and medium-sized players, their own interest is just to maintain employment in the kind of family mindset, maintain sufficient return on their investments to keep their owners happy, maintain the house in Nice and every year another Mercedes. Okay. Whereas if you are working for Gerresheimer Glass, you are part of a big conglomerate, and at the end you have shareholders who would always have to have the highest return on investment. So your incentive is very different. If you happen to run a particular large German glass producer and you have small and medium-sized companies out there with depreciated assets that are not as greedy as your shareholders are, you have a tough time. So you really can't compete with these guys in output markets because it's a commodity product and they're not as greedy as you are. And you have no scale advantage. But what you can do is, in wage negotiations, so our Stanford guys tell us, you agree on wages that you can still pay, but will be prohibitive for the small and medium-sized suppliers. We heard about that before. How do you call that strategy? A strategy that is actually geared not to win in the output market, but to kill competition off in the input market. We saw that in our steel industry example, remember? Raising rivals' costs, okay? So we have actually strategies that are being used for the sheer benefit of some corporate players at the detriment of the wage, at the detriment of the entire industry. The point I'm making is that some of our immobilities, inflexibilities, and the market failures that we're dealing with here, if we're Keynesian, actually homemade. Let me point another one. How many of you come from companies that for the last 4 or 5 years have hired people? Hired people. Hired people? Yeah, new jobs would be net. Okay. How many of you were actually hiring people yourself? How many of you hired someone who had been unemployed for the last 8 years? Olivier. That is very nice of you. But you are an exception, huh? Now why do you think that is? Don't we have people that have been unemployed for 8 years in your countries here? Why don't you hire people that have been unemployed for 8 years? Normally, unless you're Olivier. What's your rationale not hiring someone who has been unemployed for 8 years? Why don't you give this person a chance? Skills? How many of you come from rocket science industries where skills are moving very fast? Not that many, huh? So it's not skill. What is it really? So you assume that these people are not employable. You stigmatize these folks, and you should feel guilty about it. Or maybe you shouldn't.
I feel guilty if I've been working hard for 8 years and they were just eating bonbons.
Can we do that later on? We talk about that. We do a kind of a give and take and schmoozing thing. No. But there may be actually a reason why Colleen is right. We should be stigmatizing these people. And why is that? It's not because the skills have changed, but it's actually important to realize what employment does to us.